The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days when Maya Ellison walked into Riverside Trauma Center for what she thought would be another ordinary night shift. She was 29, tired in the particular way that only ICU nurses understand, the kind of exhaustion that lives behind the eyes and never fully leaves even after a full night's sleep. She'd been working double shifts for 2 weeks straight, ever since the hospital lost 3 nurses to burnout, and tonight she told herself she'd just get through it, clock out, go home, and sleep for a year. She had no idea that in 6 hours, her entire life would split into a before and an after. The first ambulance came in at 11:47 p.m., sirens cutting through the storm like a scream. Then a second. Then a third. The dispatch radio crackled with words that made every nurse in the building stop moving for half a second: multiple gunshot wounds, mass casualty, military personnel, ETA 4 minutes. Maya's hands were already moving before her brain caught up, grabbing gloves, clearing a bay, shouting for a crash cart. She had trained for chaos her whole career, but nothing quite prepares you for 6 men being wheeled through automatic doors at once, all bleeding, all in tactical gear soaked black with rain and blood, all breathing in that shallow, rationed way that means a body is trying to survive on borrowed time. Nobody told her who they were. Nobody had time to. She just saw 6 human beings who needed her, and so she did what she always did, she worked. She worked on the one with the chest wound first, her fingers finding the right pressure point before her mind had even finished processing the injury, because 11 years of trauma nursing teaches your hands to think faster than your thoughts. She worked on the one whose leg was barely attached, tying a tourniquet with a speed that made the young resident beside her stare in disbelief. She moved from bed to bed like she had 4 hands instead of 2, calling out vitals, correcting a doctor's dosage under her breath so quietly that only he heard her, saving a mistake before it became a tragedy. Somewhere around 2 a.m., one of the men, barely conscious, blood loss making his voice a whisper, grabbed her wrist and said one word: "Commander." Maya assumed it was delirium. She squeezed his hand back and told him he was safe now, that he needed to save his strength, and moved on to the next bed. She didn't think about the word again. Not that night. By 4 a.m., all 6 men were stable. It wasn't luck. It wasn't even just skill. It was a nurse who refused to let go of a single one of them, who fought every setback with the stubbornness of someone who had decided, somewhere deep in her bones years ago, that she would not lose people on her table if she could help it. When the sun finally came up, gray and thin through the hospital windows, Maya sat down in the break room for the first time in 9 hours, her scrub stained, her hands shaking slightly now that the adrenaline was finally leaving her body. She thought that was the end of it. She thought she'd go home, sleep, and come back tomorrow to do it all again, the way she always had, unnoticed, unthanked, invisible in the way that nurses so often are in a system that runs on their backs while barely remembering their names. She was wrong. 3 days later, the 6 men, recovering, bandaged, some still connected to monitors, asked the hospital administrator if they could see her. Maya walked into the recovery wing expecting a quiet thank you, maybe a handshake, the kind of gratitude patients often gave before disappearing back into their lives. Instead, she found 6 men in wheelchairs and hospital beds, some barely able to sit upright, all of them straightening themselves as best they could the moment she entered the room. And then, without a word of instruction, without anyone telling them to, all 6 of them raised their hands to their foreheads in a salute, slow, deliberate, and utterly silent. Maya froze in the doorway. "I'm just a nurse," she said quietly, almost apologetically, as if the gesture were meant for someone else, someone more important, someone in a uniform with rank insignia instead of scrubs with a coffee stain on the sleeve. But the man closest to her, the one who had called her commander in his delirium 3 nights before, shook his head. "No," he said, his voice steadier now but still raw with emotion. "You held this team together when we couldn't hold ourselves together. You made calls faster than some of the officers I've served under for a decade. You didn't panic once. Not once. In our world, that's not just a nurse. That's a commander." One by one, the others nodded in agreement, and Maya realized this wasn't gratitude, it was recognition, offered by men who understood exactly what leadership under pressure looked like because they had built their entire lives around it. They had seen something in her that night that most people never get to witness in themselves, the version of a person who doesn't break when everything around them is breaking. News of the moment spread quietly at first, a photo taken by a nurse in the doorway, a story shared in a hospital newsletter, and then it exploded far beyond Riverside's walls, because people were starving for a story about quiet, unglamorous heroism in a world so often obsessed with the loud kind. Strangers wrote to her. Veterans wrote to her. Other nurses, exhausted and unseen in their own hospitals, wrote to say that her story had made them cry in their car after a night shift, because for once, someone like them had been seen, had been called what they actually were instead of what their job title suggested. Maya never asked for any of it. She still doesn't think of herself as extraordinary. She still shows up to 12-hour shifts, still holds trembling hands in the middle of the night, still corrects a young doctor's mistake without ever needing credit for it. But now there's a photograph on the break room wall at Riverside Trauma Center, 6 soldiers saluting a nurse who insists she was just doing her job, and underneath it, someone taped a small handwritten note that simply reads, "Sometimes the strongest commanders never wear a uniform." That photograph has become a quiet reminder to everyone who walks past it that leadership isn't about rank or title. It's about who refuses to let go when everything is falling apart, who keeps their hands steady when 6 lives are hanging in the balance, who never once thinks about being thanked while they're busy making sure someone else gets to live. Maya Ellison never wanted to be a hero. She just wanted to be a nurse who did her job well. But sometimes, doing your job well, with everything you have, with a steadiness that doesn't waver even when the world around you is chaos, is exactly what makes someone a commander, whether they wear the title or not. If this story moved you even a little, if it reminded you that the quietest people in the room are often the strongest ones, do one thing before you go: hit that subscribe button. Stories like Maya's deserve to be told, and they deserve to reach the people who need them most. The tired nurse finishing a double shift, the veteran who still remembers a face from a hospital bed, the person scrolling late at night who just needs a reminder that quiet strength still exists in this world. Subscribe now, turn on notifications, and join us for more stories that remind us who the real heroes are.